The gavel slammed down like a gunshot. My ears rang as the judge's voice echoed through the courtroom. Guilty on all counts. I was 17 years old. The floor seemed to disappear beneath me. Faces blurred. Someone was screaming. My mother. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Guards gripped my arms, cold metal handcuffs biting into my wrists. 25 years to life, the judge announced, not even looking at me. A kid, a high school senior with college acceptance letters waiting at home. But I didn't do it, I whispered. Nobody heard, or nobody cared. It was only when Detective Morrison passed by me, his eyes meeting mine for just a second, that I saw it. A slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. Almost a smile. That's when I understood. My conviction had been decided long before I ever stepped foot in that courtroom. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments if you've ever known someone who experienced something similar. My name is Terrell Jackson. I'm 42 years old. I was born and raised in Eastville, Pennsylvania, son of James, a factory worker, and Gloria, a nurse's aide who worked double shifts to keep food on the table. I'm a tall black man with a muscular build, dark brown eyes that my mom always said were too serious for a child, and close-cropped hair that's now sprinkled with gray. Before all this happened, I lived in the Parkside neighborhood and worked at Wilson's auto shop as a mechanic's apprentice after school and on weekends. My family was close-knit, just me, my parents, and my younger sister Tasha, who was 13 when everything fell apart. I never thought my life was anything special back then. We didn't have much money, but we got by. My dad taught me everything about cars from the time I could hold a wrench. By 17, I could take apart and rebuild an engine blindfolded. That's what I thought I'd do after high school. Work at the shop full-time, save up for community college, maybe open my own garage someday. The week before everything happened, I'd received an acceptance letter from state with a partial scholarship. Mom cried when she saw it. Dad just squeezed my shoulder so hard it almost hurt, but I could see the pride in his eyes. First Thompson to go to college, he kept telling the neighbors. I'd never seen him stand so tall. I wasn't a perfect kid. I'd gotten into fights defending Tasha when boys harassed her. I'd been stopped by police a few times for matching descriptions or looking suspicious while walking home late from work. My parents had given me the talk when I was 12, how to act around police, keep your hands visible, don't make sudden movements, say yes sir and no sir. Just part of growing up black in America. I remember Mr. Wilson, my boss, pulled me aside one day after a customer had asked for someone else to work on his car. Don't take it personal, son, he'd said. Some folks just ain't ready to see someone like you be good at something. I just nodded. It wasn't the first time, wouldn't be the last. 2 weeks before the arrest, I was finishing work on a restored '67 Mustang. Beautiful car. The owner, Mrs. Landon, a widow in her 60s, brought me homemade cookies as thanks. Said I reminded her of her son who was overseas in the military. She asked if I'd drive the car to her house once it was finished, since she was nervous about handling it after the restoration. I didn't know it then, but Mrs. Landon lived just 3 blocks from where Heather Collins was killed. The night Heather died, I was delivering that Mustang to Mrs. Landon around 8 p.m. I remember stopping at Murphy's convenience store for gas. The clerk, Pete Murphy himself, nodded at me like he always did. I bought a Coke and some chips, used the bathroom, smiled at the security camera out of habit. Mom always said, be polite even when nobody's watching. My high school years had been ordinary but good. I played JV basketball until sophomore year, when I quit to work more hours at the shop. I had a small group of friends, mostly guys who shared my interest in cars. We'd hang out in Wilson's garage on weekends, tinkering with old engines, dreaming about the cars we'd own someday. There was a girl, Shanice, who I'd been seeing for about 6 months. Nothing serious yet, but we had plans. She wanted to study nursing like my mom. Sometimes she'd bring me lunch at the shop, and Mr. Wilson would tease me about having a fancy lunch lady. The night everything happened, she'd called to tell me she'd been accepted to the same college as me. We were making plans to celebrate that weekend. I had normal teenage dreams. Wanted my own car, was saving up for this beat-up Camaro Mr. Wilson had in the back lot. Thought maybe Shanice and I might get serious eventually. Hoped to make my parents proud. Simple stuff. At school, I kept my head down, got decent grades. Not spectacular, but good enough for that partial scholarship. My English teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had pushed me to apply to college. "You're smarter than you think, Marcus," she'd said. "Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do." The strangest thing about the days before your life falls apart is how normal they are. The Monday before my arrest, I went to school, worked my shift at Wilson's, had dinner with my family, called Shanice, did some homework, went to bed. Tuesday was the same. Wednesday too. Nothing to suggest that by Friday I'd be in handcuffs, accused of a crime I didn't commit. I knew Heather Collins only vaguely. She was in my biology class junior year when we were paired for a project about ecosystems. Smart girl, friendly enough, but we ran in different circles. After the project ended, we'd nod in the hallways sometimes, but that was it. I remember thinking she seemed nice, but a bit intense. The type who stressed about getting an A instead of an A. Our school was like most American high schools, informally segregated by race and class. The white kids from the nice neighborhoods like Heather didn't mix much with kids from Parkside like me. Not out of explicit hatred, just the invisible lines that everyone understood. Different lunch tables, different parties, different expectations. The day before my life changed forever, I remember feeling hopeful. I was saving money for college, had a girl I liked, and was good at something I enjoyed. For a kid from Parkside, that was more than many got. If I delivered the car an hour earlier, if I hadn't stopped at Murphy's for that Coke, if Pete hadn't gone on break right after I left, if the security tape hadn't been recorded over the next day as part of their normal routine, maybe I'd still be a free man. But how could I have known that those 20 minutes would cost me 25 years of my life? Have you watched our previous videos about criminal justice? Hit that like button if this story is opening your eyes to the realities many face in the justice system. The knocking came at 6:17 a.m., 3 days after Heather Collins's body was found. I remember the time exactly because I glanced at my alarm clock, thinking it was too early for anyone to visit. 4 officers burst through our front door, guns drawn, shouting orders. Mom was still in her nightgown, screaming. Dad kept asking what was happening, his hands raised high. I was forced to the floor, a knee in my back, cold metal handcuffs cutting into my wrists. "Terrell Jackson, you're under arrest for the murder of Heather Collins." The name hit me like a physical blow. Heather Collins. The white girl from the nice part of town whose face had been all over the local news for days. The honor student, the volleyball captain. The girl everyone was looking for until a jogger found her body in Hampton Park. "There's been a mistake," I kept saying at the police station. I didn't even know her. Detective Morrison smiled thinly. "We have witnesses who saw your car near the scene." "That's impossible. I was delivering a car to Mrs. Landon that night." "Convenient," Detective Reynolds said, exchanging glances with Morrison. "And she'll vouch for you?" "Yes. I mean, she saw me arrive around 8:30. The ME puts time of death between 7:30 and 9 p.m., Morrison said, his voice hardening. "You had plenty of time to kill her and then show up at the old lady's house." The questions went on for hours. Where was I before Mrs. Landon's? Did I know Heather from school? Was I angry she wouldn't date someone like me? The implications were clear in every question. I asked for a lawyer around noon. They ignored me. By 3 p.m. I was dizzy with exhaustion. "We have your fingerprints on her backpack," Morrison announced suddenly. "That's impossible," I said. "I never touched—" "You calling me a liar, boy?" He slammed his hand on the table. "We found the backpack in a dumpster behind Wilson's auto shop." That's when the first chill of real fear hit me. Someone had planted evidence. Later, I would learn that the fingerprint was from a school project Heather and I had both worked on in biology class months earlier. But by then, it was too late. My court-appointed attorney, Mr. Grayson, was a tired man in his 60s with bloodshot eyes and a perpetual cough. He carried a stack of files so high I doubted he knew which one was mine. Our first meeting lasted 12 minutes. "They're offering a deal," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Second-degree murder, 15 years. But I didn't kill her." He sighed. "They have your fingerprints, a witness who saw a young black male fleeing the scene, and the fact that you delivered a car a block away during the time of murder. The DA is pushing for the death penalty if this goes to trial. The evidence mounted in ways that defied belief. A partial footprint at the scene consistent with my work boots. A strand of fiber that couldn't be excluded as coming from my jacket. A witness who claimed to see a black male in a dark hoodie running from the park, though they couldn't identify me specifically. The prosecution's theory emerged. I had encountered Heather while delivering the car, followed her into the park, attacked her when she rejected me, then continued to my delivery as if nothing had happened. Two key things were never properly investigated. First, a neighbor reported seeing a white SUV speeding away from the area, but police focused exclusively on my presence in the neighborhood. Second, Heather's ex-boyfriend, Brad Wilkins, had threatened her just days before at school when she refused to get back together, witnessed by several students who were never called to testify. The local paper ran my mugshot under headlines like, "Local teen charged in honor student's murder," and "Mechanic's apprentice faces death penalty." Comment sections filled with calls for swift justice for making an example of me. A reporter dug up my juvenile record, a misdemeanor for fighting when I defended Tasha from harassment, describing me as having a history of violence. My parents spent their life savings on bail, but the judge denied it, calling me a flight risk and danger to the community. I spent 10 months in county jail awaiting trial, watching my father age years and weeks, seeing my mother's hands shake more violently with each visit. "They're railroading you, son," Dad whispered during one visit, his voice breaking. "The system's not built for us to win." Mom was more optimistic at first. She contacted every lawyer in town, but none would take the case pro bono. Some quoted fees that were more than what our house was worth. One told her bluntly, "With the evidence they claim to have, and given who the victim was, no one wants to touch this case." Shanice came to visit once. The awkwardness between us was painful. She said she believed me, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. Her parents had forbidden her from seeing me again. 2 weeks later, I received a letter saying she was going to college out of state. That was the last I heard from her. The isolation of jail was suffocating. I shared a cell with 3 other men, all awaiting trial for various offenses. One was a heroin addict who went through withdrawal during my first week there. The sounds and smells of his suffering still haunt me. Another was a middle-aged man charged with armed robbery who took a strange liking to me, offering protection that felt more threatening than comforting. I tried to keep hope alive by reading books from the jail's meager library and writing letters to anyone who might help: the ACLU, the Innocence Project, civil rights attorneys. Most went unanswered. The worst part was watching the investigation unfold through snippets from my parents and fragments of news reports. The police never followed other leads. They never interviewed the students who heard Brad threaten Heather. They dismissed Mrs. Landon's testimony as the confused recollections of an elderly woman. They never found the driver of the white SUV. Instead, they built a case around me, twisting facts to fit their narrative. A classmate recalled me staring at Heather in the hallway once, transformed into evidence of obsession. My fingerprint on her backpack from a shared project became proof I had handled her belongings on the night of the murder. My presence in the neighborhood became stalking. The morning they took me to court for the trial, Grayson pulled me aside. "Keep your head down. Don't show emotion. That jury is looking for any reason to convict you." In that moment, as deputies led me toward the courtroom in shackles and an orange jumpsuit, I finally understood that the system I had been taught to believe in had already decided I was guilty. I wasn't a person to them. I was a convenient solution to a horrific crime that demanded someone pay. Tap that subscribe button and hit the notification bell if you want to follow this series about justice system failures. Your support helps us create more content like this. The courtroom might as well have been a theater, and I was cast as the villain before the curtain ever rose. They brought me in wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles, 12 jurors watching my every movement. Not one of them looked like me. 11 white faces, 1 Asian woman. No black jurors at all. During jury selection, the prosecution had used peremptory challenges to dismiss every black potential juror for reasons they claimed had nothing to do with race. My parents sat in the first row, Mom clutching her Bible so tight her knuckles were white. Dad wore his only suit, the one from his wedding 20 years earlier. Tasha wasn't allowed to attend since she was a minor. The prosecutor, Angela Winters, was known for her perfect conviction record and political ambitions. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice ringing with righteous certainty, "Heather Collins had her whole life ahead of her. College plans, dreams, a future. The defendant took all of that away in an act of vicious, premeditated murder. She painted me as a predator, an outsider who saw Heather as an object, who couldn't accept rejection. She showed photos of Heather alive, smiling in her volleyball uniform, at prom, receiving an award. Then came the crime scene photos. Several jurors gasped. I closed my eyes. Our key defense, my alibi at Mrs. Landon's, crumbled when she testified. At 74, confused by the aggressive questioning, she couldn't be certain of the exact time I arrived. "It was dark," she said, her voice quavering. "I think it was around 8:30, but it could have been later." The prosecution's forensic expert testified that the partial footprint matched the general size and tread pattern of my work boots, though he admitted under cross-examination that thousands of similar boots exist. The fiber analysis was equally tenuous, consistent with my jacket but impossible to definitively match. My attorney barely challenged these assertions. The prosecution's star witness was Jason Meeks, a known drug dealer who suddenly remembered seeing a black guy in a dark hoodie running near the park that night. It emerged during cross-examination that Meeks was facing his third strike for possession with intent to distribute but had received a plea deal. My attorney failed to hammer this point home. The defense Grayson presented was pathetically brief. He called character witnesses, my boss, a teacher, our pastor, who all testified to my good character. But he never presented an alternative theory of the crime, never mentioned Brad Wilkins, never questioned the suspicious absence of the white SUV from the investigation. When I took the stand against Grayson's advice, the prosecutor tore into me. "You claim you didn't know Heather well, yet your fingerprints were on her backpack," Winters asked, pacing in front of the jury. "We worked on a school project together months ago," I explained. "Convenient explanation," she smirked. "And you just happened to be in her neighborhood the night she was killed?" "I was delivering a car to Mrs. Landon." "Yet Mrs. Landon can't verify the exact time you arrived, can she?" Hour after hour, she twisted my words, interrupted my explanations, made innocent facts sound damning. The jury watched with cold eyes. The deliberation lasted just 4 hours. When they filed back in, not one juror would look at me. On the count of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant, Terrell Jackson, guilty. I heard my mother's wail, saw my father catch her as her knees gave out. My attorney patted my shoulder awkwardly. At the sentencing hearing a week later, Heather's parents gave victim impact statements. Her father called me a monster. Her mother asked how I could show no remorse. I wanted to tell them I was sorry for their loss, that I hadn't killed their daughter, that the real killer was still out there. But Grayson warned me to stay silent. The judge looked at me with contempt. "Terrell Jackson, you have been found guilty of taking the life of a bright, promising young woman in a senseless act of violence. I sentence you to 25 years to life in state prison." 3 months earlier, I had been a high school senior with college acceptance letters and dreams of owning my own business. Now, I was prisoner, juror 647891, convicted of a murder I didn't commit, facing the next quarter-century behind bars. I remember every detail of that moment. The cold handcuffs clicking tighter, the smell of wood polish and desperation, the way sunlight streamed through the high windows, creating bars of light on the floor, the sound of Heather's mother sobbing, the shuffle of papers as the court reporter documented the end of my freedom. As they led me away, I caught a glimpse of Brad Wilkins sitting at the back of the courtroom. Our eyes met briefly. He didn't look guilty or triumphant. He looked relieved. That night in my cell, I cried for the first time since my arrest. Not just for myself, but for Heather, for my parents, for the truth that had been buried under a mountain of circumstantial evidence and racial bias. The next day, they transferred me to Rockview State Penitentiary. The bus ride was 5 hours of shackled discomfort, watching the world I knew disappear through barred windows. Other prisoners sized me up, some with predatory interest, others with indifference. A guard warned me that my status as a convicted killer of a white girl would make me a target for certain prison factions and potentially protection for others. "Prison politics," he called it. "Better figure out where you stand fast." As the prison came into view, a massive concrete complex surrounded by razor wire. I realized I was entering a world with its own rules, hierarchies, and dangers. A world where my protestations of innocence would mean nothing, where survival would require compromises I couldn't yet imagine. What hurt most wasn't the verdict. I'd stopped believing in justice the moment they arrested me. It was seeing my parents broken, watching my future disappear, and knowing that somewhere, the person who really killed Heather Collins was walking free. This story has more shocking twists ahead. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the devastating impact of wrongful convictions and comment below what you think happened next. The prison intake process stripped away whatever remained of my former self. Guards barked orders as I was photographed, fingerprinted, deloused, and handed a stack of rough prison clothes with my number stenciled across the back. "First-degree murderer," one guard announced loudly as he checked my paperwork. Other inmates looked over, sizing me up. In prison hierarchy, a convicted child killer or woman killer sits at the bottom. I could feel the target forming on my back. My first night, I lay awake on a thin mattress listening to the soundtrack of prison, coughing, crying, occasional screams, guards' boots on concrete floors. The air smelled of industrial cleaner, sweat, and despair. By morning, word had spread about my conviction. 3 men cornered me in the shower. "We don't like baby killers," the largest one growled, a homemade knife in his hand. I took the beating without fighting back. Fighting meant solitary, and solitary meant going mad. Within days, I understood the unwritten rules. The prison was informally segregated, blacks with blacks, whites with whites, Latinos with Latinos. Protection required affiliation. I reluctantly joined the black inmates group, not out of solidarity, but survival. "You didn't do it, did you?" an older man named Reggie asked one day in the yard. He'd been inside for 20 years on a robbery gone wrong. I can always tell. He became my first mentor, teaching me to navigate prison politics, showing me how to avoid the guards' attention, warning me which inmates to avoid. As months stretched into years, the outside world receded. Dad visited every Saturday like clockwork until his heart attack in my 3rd year. After that, he came monthly, moving slower each time. Mom never missed a visit, always bringing photos of Tasha, her high school graduation, her college dorm, later her wedding that I couldn't attend. My friends stopped writing after the 1st year. Tasha wrote faithfully, but her letters carried the burden of a life continuing without me. She was studying criminal justice, she wrote, because of me. Prison time has its own physics. Days crawl while years somehow fly by. I worked in the laundry, then the library. I got my GED, then started taking correspondence courses through a prison education program. I watched younger inmates arrive, age, and sometimes leave. I broke up fights, prevented suicides, witnessed stabbings, endured lockdowns. The realities of prison life were brutal in ways I hadn't imagined. We worked manufacturing jobs that paid 32 cents an hour, while the prison charged $3 per minute for phone calls home. Basic necessities like toothpaste or deodorant cost a week's wages at the commissary. Medical care was a joke. Men with serious conditions waited months to see a doctor, often receiving nothing but ibuprofen regardless of their symptoms. The racial dynamics inside mirrored the broken system outside, but with higher stakes. Guards favored certain groups, overlooking their infractions while strictly punishing others. Violence was currency, respect was survival, and privacy didn't exist. Every aspect of my life was controlled. When I ate, slept, showered, exercised, I witnessed men broken by the system. Some turned to drugs smuggled in by visitors or guards. Others joined gangs for protection. Many simply retreated into themselves, becoming shells of who they once were. Suicide attempts were common. Hanging from cell bars, hoarded pills, makeshift weapons turned inward. "This place isn't designed to rehabilitate," Reggie told me once. "It's designed to warehouse people society's given up on." I was determined not to let the system break me. I established routines, reading, exercising, studying. I kept a journal, recording memories of my life before prison to keep them from fading. I forced myself to stay connected to my family, even when visits left me depressed for days afterward, the contrast between their freedom and my captivity too painful to bear. The hardest blow came in my 7th year when Catherine, a law student volunteering with the Innocence Project, told me they couldn't take my case. "There's no DNA evidence to test," she explained gently. "Without physical evidence that could exonerate you, it's almost impossible." That night, I nearly gave up. What was the point of maintaining innocence no one believed? But the next morning, I went to the prison library and checked out every book on criminal law they had. If no one would fight for me, I would fight for myself. I filed my first appeal pro se, handwriting hundreds of pages of legal arguments. It was denied. I filed again. Denied. Again. Denied. In my 12th year, I met Jamal, a former jailhouse lawyer transferred from another facility. He took interest in my case, pointing out procedural errors my court-appointed attorneys had missed. We worked nights in the library, filing motions, researching precedents. Most went nowhere, but the work kept hope alive. Prison life grew increasingly expensive. A 15-minute call to mom cost nearly a week's prison wages. Commissary prices for basics like toothpaste or deodorant doubled, then tripled. The prison cut educational programs, then recreation time, then library hours. In my 15th year, I survived a riot that left 3 dead. In my 16th, I spent 4 months in solitary for insubordination after questioning a guard about missing mail. The tiny concrete cell nearly broke me. I began hallucinating by the 3rd week, talking to shadows by the 2nd month. Solitary confinement, administrative segregation they called it, was its own special hell. A 6-by-9-foot concrete box, no windows, a slot in the door for food trays, lights that never fully turned off. 23 hours a day alone with only your thoughts. 1 hour in a slightly larger cage they called the yard. No books except religious texts. No visits. No calls. Time loses meaning in solitary. Minutes stretch into hours. Days blur together. You count ceiling tiles, recite poems, sing songs. Anything to keep your mind from unraveling completely. Some men screamed continuously. Others went mute. I forced myself to exercise. Push-ups, sit-ups, anything to exhaust my body enough that I might sleep despite the constant light and noise. When I returned to general population, fellow inmates said I seemed different, more withdrawn, jumpier, less patient. I felt it too, a fundamental shift in my brain chemistry. Studies now show that solitary causes lasting psychological damage similar to traumatic brain injury, but back then, it was just standard procedure. Through it all, I kept filing appeals, kept writing letters to innocence projects, journalists, anyone who might listen. Most went unanswered. Then came the letter that changed everything. It arrived on a Tuesday in my 18th year. The envelope had no return address, just my inmate number. Inside was a handwritten note and a faded photograph. "I've carried this secret too long. Brad Wilkins killed Heather. I was there. I helped him cover it up. I can't live with it anymore." The photo showed Brad with his arm around a young woman I didn't recognize, both smiling at the camera. On the back, someone had written, "The night before Heather died, he was wearing the blue SUV keys." For the first time in 18 years, I felt something dangerous flicker in my chest. Hope. Do you know anyone who's been wrongfully accused or had problems with the justice system? Share your stories in the comments. Your experience might help others facing similar situations. Hope is dangerous in prison. It can sustain you or destroy you. With that anonymous letter clutched in my hand, I felt both possibilities. First, I needed to understand what I was up against. The legal system has built-in barriers against revisiting convictions, statutes of limitations on filing certain appeals, procedural rules that prioritize finality over truth, and a simple, devastating reality. No one wanted to admit they'd locked up an innocent man for nearly 2 decades. I wrote to 12 innocence projects before receiving a response. The Justice Reform Initiative, a small nonprofit in Philadelphia, sent a young attorney named Maya Rodriguez to interview me. "I'll be honest, Mr. Jackson," she said across the visiting room table. "Exoneration cases without DNA evidence succeed less than 2% of the time. For black defendants, it's even lower." "I have new evidence," I said, sliding her the letter. She studied it, her expression carefully neutral. Anonymous letters aren't admissible in court, but if we can find this person. The photo mentions a blue SUV. A witness reported seeing a white SUV speeding away the night of the murder, but police never followed up. Maya nodded. It's a start, but I need to be clear. This will likely take years, and the odds are still against us. What followed was a grueling process of legal filings, rejections, and appeals. We filed a motion for post-conviction relief based on newly discovered evidence. Denied. We appealed. Denied again. Meanwhile, Maya and her team tracked down Brad Wilkins. He'd left town shortly after the trial, moving to Arizona, then Nevada, then Oregon. He'd had 3 domestic violence complaints filed against him by 2 different women, all later dropped. The prosecutor's office fought us at every turn. Angela Winters was now a Superior Court judge. Detective Morrison had retired with honors. No one wanted this case reopened. In my 21st year of imprisonment, we caught our first break. Maya found Jason Meeks, the prosecution's star witness, now clean and sober, working as a counselor at a rehab center in Ohio. They told me what to say, he admitted in a sworn affidavit. Morrison said if I didn't testify against you, they'd make sure I got 20 years on my drug charges. They coached me for days on exactly what to say. We filed a Brady violation claim, arguing the prosecution had illegally withheld evidence of witness coaching. The court rejected it, ruling the affidavit lacked credibility given Meeks' criminal history. The system is designed to prevent admission of mistakes, Maya explained during one of her monthly visits. It's not about justice, it's about preserving convictions. The darkest moment came when my mother died in my 23rd year of imprisonment. I wasn't allowed to attend her funeral. The guards let me watch a video of the service in a small administration office, shackled to a chair, a box of tissues my only concession. I watched my sister deliver the eulogy, describing how Mom had never stopped fighting for me, how her last words were about continuing the fight. That night, I nearly gave up. What was left to fight for? The next morning, Maya called with news. She'd found the anonymous letter writer. Jennifer Crane had been dating Brad Wilkins at the time of Heather's murder. She'd moved across the country, changed her name, built a new life. Now, facing a terminal cancer diagnosis, she wanted to clear her conscience. Her videotaped deposition was devastating. She described how Brad had been obsessed with Heather, how he'd stalked her after their breakup. The night of the murder, he'd called Jennifer in a panic, asking her to meet him at Hampton Park. She found him there, clothes bloodied, hysterical. He said it was an accident, that Heather had laughed at him when he begged her to come back, Jennifer testified. He hit her. She fell and hit her head. Then he panicked and strangled her. Jennifer described helping Brad clean his blue SUV, throwing away his clothes, creating an alibi. She'd kept the secret for over 2 decades, haunted by guilt. The district attorney's office tried to block the testimony, arguing it was too late, that the case was closed. But the media had caught wind of the story. Local papers ran headlines questioning my conviction. A true crime podcast series highlighted the flaws in the original investigation. Each legal victory was followed by new obstacles. The system seemed designed to exhaust us, to make the path to justice so arduous that we'd eventually give up. Every filing faced procedural challenges. Every hearing was delayed. Every piece of evidence was scrutinized more thoroughly than the original evidence that convicted me. The racial dynamics couldn't be ignored. Statistical studies presented by our team showed that exoneration rates for black men wrongfully convicted of killing white victims were significantly lower than for other demographic combinations. The time from conviction to exoneration averaged 7 years longer. The compensation, when awarded, was substantially less. Meanwhile, I watched news reports about Brad Wilkins from my prison TV room. He'd become a successful real estate developer in Portland, married with 2 children, active in his church and local politics. He called the allegations preposterous and a desperate attempt by a convicted killer to escape justice. His wife stood by his side at press conferences, glaring defiantly at cameras. His attorney issued statements about harassment and defamation. They hired their own experts to challenge Jennifer's testimony, suggesting her terminal illness had affected her memory or judgment. In a stunning turnaround, The son of Detective Morrison, now a police officer himself, came forward with pages from his father's personal notebook found after his death. The notes revealed that Morrison had deliberately ignored the SUV witness and evidence pointing to Brad Wilkins, writing, "Thompson fits profile better. Easier conviction." The court scheduled a hearing to review all evidence. Brad Wilkins, confronted with Jennifer's testimony and the detective's notes, invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, which itself spoke volumes. After 3 full days of testimony, the judge looked directly at me for perhaps the first time. In light of substantial new evidence and clear misconduct in the original investigation, this court vacates the conviction of Terrell Jackson and orders his immediate release. After 25 years, 3 months, and 14 days, I was finally going home. If this story is impacting you, share it with friends and family. Many people have no idea how the system can fail innocent people. Hit like to support this important content. Freedom hit me like a physical shock. The prison doors clanged shut behind me, and suddenly there were no walls, no fences, no boundaries stretching to the horizon. The vastness of the open sky made me dizzy. Tasha was waiting, now 38, with gray streaking her hair. Beside her stood her husband and their teenage son, my nephew whom I'd only seen in photographs. Maya stood nearby with a small group of supporters holding welcome signs. "What now?" I asked as we drove away from the prison. "Now you live," Tasha said, squeezing my hand. But living proved more complicated than I had imagined. The world had transformed during my absence. Cell phones, internet, social media, all were alien to me. Simple tasks, like using an ATM or self-checkout at a store, became anxiety-inducing challenges. I jumped at sudden noises, struggled to sleep in a room without bars and locks, found myself automatically waiting for permission before entering a doorway or sitting down. Finding housing was my first major obstacle. Rental applications asked about criminal history, and despite my exoneration, the 25-year gap in my employment history raised red flags. When landlords Googled my name, they found old news stories about the murder, but not always the exoneration. Tasha insisted I stay with her family, but I felt like an intruder in their lives, unable to navigate normal family dynamics after decades in prison. Her son watched me warily, unsure what to make of this stranger suddenly at their dinner table. Employment proved even more elusive. At 42, I had no relevant job experience, no computer skills, and a notorious name in our community. Businesses that initially expressed interest backed out after learning who I was. "We're concerned about customer perception," one manager explained apologetically. I finally found work at a warehouse on the edge of town, loading trucks on the overnight shift. The pay barely covered basic expenses, but it was something. My co-workers kept their distance, whispering when they thought I couldn't hear. "That's him, the guy who got out on a technicality. They say he really did kill that girl. Would you trust him?" The state had no wrongful conviction compensation statute. My lawsuit against the county for malicious prosecution dragged on for years, with the city's attorneys arguing that the police had acted in good faith, based on evidence available at the time. Meanwhile, those responsible faced few consequences. Angela Winters remained a judge. Brad Wilkins couldn't be prosecuted for Heather's murder due to statute of limitations on the evidence tampering charges, though he was eventually convicted of perjury. The Collins family never accepted my innocence. They let a killer go free on a procedural technicality, Heather's father told the newspaper. I couldn't blame him for his anger. The system had failed his daughter too. Sometimes I encountered people from my past life. Former classmates now middle-aged, teachers now elderly. Their reactions varied from awkward sympathy to obvious discomfort. A few apologized for believing the worst. Most just avoided eye contact and hurried away. The psychological toll was perhaps the heaviest burden. I suffered from PTSD, anxiety, and depression. Nightmares of prison jolted me awake most nights. Crowded spaces triggered panic attacks. Trust didn't come easily after decades of necessary suspicion. A turning point came 3 years after my release, when my lawsuit finally settled for a fraction of what my attorneys had hoped. It wasn't justice, but it was enough to buy a small house in a neighboring town and return to school for vocational training. I began speaking at law schools and criminal justice reform events, sharing my story. Through this work, I connected with other exonerees, men and women who understood what I'd experienced in ways no one else could. We formed a support network, helping newcomers navigate life after exoneration. 5 years after my release, I established the Second Chance Initiative, a nonprofit helping exonerees find housing, employment, and mental health support. I couldn't recover my lost years, but I could help others rebuild their lives. The truth is, exoneration doesn't erase what happened. The certificate of innocence in my desk drawer doesn't heal the trauma of 2 decades in prison. The state's reluctant apology doesn't bring back my parents or restore the career and family I might have had. In the eyes of many, I'll always be the man who got away with murder. Despite DNA evidence, witness recantations, and the identification of the real killer, some doors remain permanently closed. But I refuse to be defined solely by what was taken from me. They stole 25 years of my life that I can never reclaim, but I won't allow them to take my future too. My story isn't just about injustice. It's about a truth that refused to stay buried, no matter how long it took. Some mornings I still wake up expecting to see cell bars. Then I walk outside, feel the sun on my face, and remind myself, I am free. After everything, that still feels like a miracle. Has this story touched your heart? Share it with someone who needs to understand the challenges faced by innocent people after exoneration. Leave a comment about what you found most impactful and if you know of organizations that help wrongfully convicted individuals.